Welcome back to the table. We've got a little bit of news this holiday season, and it is both tiny and epic, and it's Game of Thrones. Yeah. If you hadn't noticed, tiny epic Game of Thrones was recently announced, and we wanted to share it with you in case you hadn't heard about that.
Yeah.
Tell you a little bit what little we do know. There was very little in their announcement, but it gave some hints at the kind of game that we might be able to expect. It hinted at some of the mechanics. Plus, we'll have some speculation. Plus, most importantly, if you saw the thumbnail, we have a couple new details. Stuff that I don't think had been announced. I actually did a little digging with them, and they were able to share a tiny little bit.
A tiny epic little bit?
A tiny epic little bit. In fact, you know what? Happy holidays. We're going to give you that gift right now. Here are the new details about Tiny Epic Game of Thrones. And then we're going to back into it. I don't want to make people wait.
All right, that's fine.
Make people wait, and then at the end we give them the new details, and they're like, oh, that's
how
details?
We only get 1 minute watch time, and then they go, nah, I got the new details.
So I'm giving you
Stay tuned.
Pay us back. We'll give you the new details now, and then you can watch the rest. At this point, they've tuned out already. However, new details, if you don't know, this is a Tiny Epic game. It's going to be fully illustrated. Now, you might be thinking like, well, board games do that all the time. Not all board games and not all licensed board games.
A lot of licensed board games use film stills, which is not something that I've ever loved.
It's not a thing that I'm generally a big fan of either. Sometimes stills work, but film stills I'm not a big fan of. This is being illustrated. It's also not the only thing being illustrated. There's a little expansion that's going to be part of their campaign as well, which is also a new detail, technically, so I'm told. It's also going to be illustrated. I don't want to give away a full number, but they've got somewhere reaching close to 100 of original pieces of art.
And miniatures.
Oh yeah, another big detail. There's going to have really detailed miniatures, which is a unique thing for Tiny Epic, I think.
Yeah, it is a unique. Well, no, they've had miniatures in Tiny Epic Mechs had miniatures. They had the mechs.
Kind of. But they
Tiny
held
Epic zombies.
They held meeples.
Yeah, that's true. We've seen some aspect of this, but yeah, this is. I don't think it's going to be like a ton of miniatures. I don't think this is going to be I'm assuming again. Yeah. This is the first Tiny Epic IP that we've ever seen. They've never done...
Yes, I believe so.
They've never done an IP, but I have to assume that they didn't just call it Gameland Games,
Game of
Thrones. Like, they've had Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea that came in that giant box.
Yeah.
The fact that this is specifically called Tiny Epic makes me assume it's going to fit in a normal-sized Tiny Epic box. So it's probably not going to be a ton of miniatures. What I assume is it's going to be one miniature that represents your faction. And I'm guessing because this does feel like it's going to be inspired by Dudes on the Map games, that maybe this is your faction marker that represents your army moving around the board. I don't know.
There's new details on one hand, there's speculation on the other. We don't know some of these things. Like, I don't know that it would be called a Dudes on the Map, but some of the things they talked about the game doing in terms of competing over territories.
Yeah, controlling territories, sieging castles, sailing around a board,
marching and sailing. So there's going to be, I assume, some sort of movement around the board. Some of the mechanics driving that stuff have me intrigued.
It's an interesting system that they've described.
I will say, whether you're a Tiny Epic fan or not, and I'll say right up here, full transparency, there's some Tiny Epic games I like okay. There's some games that I don't. That's just the way gaming goes.
I wouldn't call myself a Tiny Epic fan. I will play the ones that I've heard are good, and I will enjoy some of them. But I am a big Game of Thrones fan, and so this is giving me the opportunity to go back to that world, so that is something I really appreciate.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see if it gives a Game of Thrones level experience. And based on the announcement, it sounds like it's ticking all the right boxes, but it is an ambitious attempt. Well, that's how Tiny Epic is. They try to bring so much game into a small little sort of package, but it has multi-use cards.
Yeah.
There's some sort of dice selection mechanism. It sounds like dice might, again, speculation.
Maybe rolling the dice.
Sounds like there's dice rolled, and then maybe each different die faces represent those different actions
like
you
Grand
can take
Austria Hotel, kind of, where you
it talked about a limited dice selection mechanic. So you're going to use those dice to do things like sail, to march and whatnot. And then the cards that I was talking about are not only multi-use, but they're also kind of house specific.
They're asymmetric.
They represent your house, so you're going to be able to do some things. I'm assuming, I can't remember all the houses, but the house, Greyjoy, their house.
Yeah, that's a house.
Is it house? Is it
House
just
Greyjoy, yeah.
Okay.
They're not one of the big ones.
They're probably going to have a lot more.
I think that's not the one that people go to when they think of Game of Thrones.
No,
but, good pull.
But because of the sailing, I figured that sailing action might benefit from some of the cards they get to play, stuff like that.
Yeah, each faction is supposed to have a very specific focus within those faction cards. But that dice mechanic that David was talking about, the interesting thing for me too is they've described that there's a follow action built in. So we don't know what that looks like. I can tell you from experience of playing a lot of games that do, usually the follow action is a worse version. So the person that actually takes the die usually either gets a bonus or a better version of the action than everybody else takes. But the fact that they're keeping you engaged turn after turn, every time somebody gets to do an action, you still get to do something. Yeah. I think I like that design principle.
Yeah, if you're watching this channel, you've probably played something like Race for the Galaxy and stuff.
Yeah, or Boon Lake has that kind of thing.
Yes, where you're able to follow with a lesser action. That is always a cool thing. It'd be interesting to see it at play here. It also sounds like in classic Game of Thrones style, you're going to have not necessarily negotiation at the table.
I think there's going to be negotiation.
But there's going to be alliances, I think, made. There's going to be some backstabbing. There's going to be alliances broken. So it sounds, again, like in classic Tiny Epic fashion, it's offering a lot of what you'd expect from a Game of Thrones experience, but in a bite-sized fashion.
A little map. And I'm guessing here, this is again speculation, but I'm guessing that this is like Game of Thrones post Robert's Rebellion, like right where the series is taking off, where all the different houses are kind of still fighting for that territory, but maybe not. This could be House of the Dragon time period. But the fact that they're already like...
I doubt it.
I doubt that. But the fact that they have an expansion coming makes me maybe think like
it is
Essos, like maybe Daenerys or the Dothraki in a separate box now can come over. That's what they did with the Game of Thrones board game. It was all Westeros, and then they introduced the other continent as part of the expansion.
Yeah, and
so maybe
this is... Specifically, if you hadn't figured this out, it is based on the show and not based on the books. So, and it might be hard to keep track of all that stuff, but a lot of the games that are out there aren't based on the show.
That's true. It's a mix. Some have been based on the show, some have been based on the books.
So since it is based on the show and since it's called Game of Thrones, my guess is it's not going to be House of the Dragon. It's probably going to be the Game of Thrones.
I don't know. I'm talking about the expansion. I don't know what the expansion was going to bring. Also, let me just say, I really hope that they did. So the fact that they're using original artwork is a great thing, as long as they get the likeness rights for the characters. Because I'll never forget, Firefly board game got the Firefly rights, but they didn't get the character rights, and you had this weird uncanny valley of illustration. So I'm hoping that that's not the case here.
It's a tricky place to navigate. I've been involved with some things in my past where you license some stuff, and you have to get a lot of rights from not only the rights holders, but in the individual performers.
The actors
and stuff
have to sign based on their contract.
My hunch is that they'll probably have to go through a gnarly approval process, but hopefully, yes, things will look mostly like what you'd expect from the show.
It's easier when you have like something like Saga of Ice and Fire because they're doing their own interpretations of these characters based on the book. But when you're directly based on the show, I want to see, Ned Stark.
I do want to see him, but I'm going to give him some relief on that because I'd rather that than stills from the show.
You're right. I would still rather not have the stills, for sure.
If anything, maybe just take the stills from the show and put a few filters on there to start, just to kick your illustrators off a little bit.
Just to give them a concept. So all of this, though, it's all coming to crowdfunding later this year.
In 2024.
Sorry.
You're watching this in 2023. It is not coming out tomorrow.
You might be watching this at the tail end of 2023, but you might be watching it in 2024.
Let's just say it's going to happen in 2024. When? We don't know. Hopefully, we'll have some information. We have covered some of the Tiny Epic stuff. We've worked with them in the past where we do a preview. We might do that. I don't know.
I'd love to get a hands on this one.
I'd like to get it
because this to me is a very unique pairing.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what we know so far. That's some of our speculation. Those are some of the new details. I think we covered everything. If you have any questions, though, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.